everybody to the Program Approval Committee meeting October 24th, 2019. Chair Bruce Weitzel, we'll do a very quick kind of check. We've done the kind of sound check, but make sure the commissioners are online. You want to identify yourselves, starting with Sam. Are you online?
This is Sam. I am here.
Okay. Jessica?
Hello, I'm here.
Okay, and Erica?
I am here.
Okay, we have a full flight today. That's great. Okay, there are this meeting actually has, in perusing it and the materials that have been sent to us by Candace, we have three areas that we're going to take a look at in particular, and just to kind of review those so we know what's ahead of us. After we go through the welcoming portion of this, we'll take a look at the response to the AQEP campus visit to Utah State. That I think Tony will be handling that. We'll also take a look at the multiple majors update and a holistic option. And again, Tony will inform us of that. And then the third item, which is the final one really for us, aside from some informational items, is the field audit process, and Wayne Strickland will do that. And I want to personally welcome Wayne, who, as Director of Program Approval, you'll be a frequent flyer here. I want to let you know that. So
okay, great.
We'll give you a punch card after 10 successful visits. You get your own agenda signed by Tony. So I don't want to get you too excited.
Okay.
That's coming. So all right.
Wonderful.
Anyway, welcome, Wayne.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you here.
Thank you.
And Candace, you've already kind of taken attendance informally anyway, so
yes.
we'll get everybody. All right, I think we're ready to go. Tony, we have, oh yes, there's one little, the magic line, Candace has pointed out again. Comments or questions from the public will only be accepted if approved or requested by the chair. I love the power. And so just keep that in mind, if you will. And I'll turn it over, Tony, to you to talk a little bit about the visit you and Ray had, and I think Candace, to the Utah State University campus. Tony, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. All righty. So first item is our AQEP. So what I need to do real quick is I need to pull up my PowerPoint. So I have that. If you lose me, please let me know. Okay, so there we are.
We're going to do the same. We're going to do the same for the benefit of the attendees.
I think that was actually, Candace sent it out to commissioners today.
And it's on the website too.
Yeah, it's on our website. So you can pull it up there if you're listening.
Right. So, oh, your PowerPoint's there. Okay. Great. So,
okay.
Are you going to put it up, Candace, on the Zoom viewer too?
yes. Yeah, we're pulling it up on the Zoom viewer. So,
Okay.
should be on the screen now. Can everybody see this?
I can.
No.
What am I looking for? I see the agenda.
We had, yeah. Is anyone seeing it?
No.
No.
It's still the agenda.
Okay, hold on a second.
I'm still share it.
Technology seems to work until it doesn't work.
Yeah. It sure looks like you're sharing. Go ahead and stop share and now try share again. And then click down here. So it sure looked like it was sharing on our end. How is that for everybody? Are you seeing it?
I see it.
Yes. Thank you.
Tony, we are there.
Yes. All righty. Yes, this is me. Next slide. All righty. Thank you, everybody, for being in attendance today. As you may recall from the last commission meeting, we had a discussion and a visit from the AQEP folks to talk a little bit about their accreditation system. You may also recall that at the end of our meeting, I had asked the commission for some guidance on next steps we might want to take. And we'd agreed that a few of us would go to actually visit one of the universities that's recently gone through AQUEP accreditation. So Candace and I arranged for a trip to Utah State University, which has just recently gone through the accreditation process with AQUEP. Several of the people who were there also have some CAPE experience and CATE experience in the past. We also, if you noted on the screen, that Dr. Rayette Newman, who, by the way, is going to officially join us in a few weeks as a commissioner. However, she was brought along on the trip because we gave the OACTE group an opportunity to send one person with Candace and I. And so, Commissioner, so you know, Rayette went on the expense of OACTE, so we didn't spend our money on Rayette. Candace and I did. And so the three of us went to Utah State. And next slide. Okay, and this was what we were aiming to do, to get some independent perspectives and assessments from individuals about what they saw as the value in AQUEP, and then to be able to relay that to you as commissioners, with the goal being first here, we do it with PAC. So we're going to go through, what we're going to do is I'm going to run through real quickly this PowerPoint, but then I want to give the opportunity for Candace and Rayette to share their perspectives, because I think it's important for you to hear the perspectives of two of the, what I would call the primary stakeholders. Yes, I will ultimately make a recommendation to the commission about.
Uh-oh. So Tony, I bet you can't hear us now, but if you can, you are frozen. So I think we're going to need to give Tony time to log off and back on. I wonder if we're having a meteor shower or something.
In Georgia.
Yeah. Well, it happened problems here too. It's just like stuff that never happens with Zoom.
I could get a table if that's the case.
Do we want to go ahead and have Brian start sharing and wait for him, or wait? For
Well,
him?
he may be so talking, so I'm afraid it's the way to see if we can get it back on.
So we're gonna give Tony a moment to log off and then back on.
Okay, I'm on.
Okay.
Okay.
The last thing we heard, Tony, was you're gonna go through the PowerPoint and then have Rayette and me share our perspectives.
Yep. Okay. So AQUEP focuses on EPP cohorts working through an accreditation process together, where CAPE is more focused on EPPs doing an individual unit-based approach to collecting very specific prescribed information, which meets one of CAPE's 5 standards, where AQUEP encourages multiple approaches to demonstrating quality, and we can see that within the standards. Next slide. Okay. So in this, I'm going to.
Oh my gosh. Tony, you're froze up again.
Is he able to hear you?
Run through real.
Can you hear us, Tony? While we are waiting for Tony, I would like to share that this PowerPoint slide is available on the website as a handout.
Is he using his phone or is it a laptop?
I think laptop.
I'm calling him, he's not responding.
I'm gonna text him and make sure he knows he's frozen up again.
If we can, probably we'll move to,
Yeah.
have you.
All righty, you guys, so can you hear? Okay. Okay, I'm trying to get on the phone so that way I don't, lose you guys.
Okay.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes.
All righty, so what I'm going to do, I'm turning off my speaker. Okay, so we're all set. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint so that way I can just run through it. And Candace, I'll tell you what slide to run through, okay?
Sounds good, thanks.
Okay, so here we go. Okay, now I'm on the slide with the standards. So you can see from the program standards with AQUEP, the focus is on more what I would call a holistic type approach, which is very much based on the shared experience of the particular EPP and what we see in terms of the EPP's goals, its strengths, and also if there are any particular items that an EPP may be looking for. So here you'll see that there's this, it's almost like a matrix where you look at completer performance and program practices, and you look at each of those through a foundational expectation and the challenges that might be presented for the EPP. So in this regard, what you'll see is there are 4 standards. One's about completer performance, one's about program practices, another standard. So those 2 were the ones that were about functional expectations, and then the contextual expectations are around professional competence and growth for completers and engagement and system improvement for the EPP. And that is different from CAPE, where CAPE focuses on what I would call the standards are a technical standard that then you provide information and evidence that meets the technical standard, and the belief is that by meeting those specific components, you'll create a narrative that therefore demonstrates that you have done pretty much what you would also see with the AQUEP model. But it goes at it from a different perspective, where AQUEP then looks at these from a narrative perspective at the get-go. So next slide. Okay. I won't run through these. These are here for your information, but you can see the CAPE standards. And then, of course, the ones that are particularly challenging in Oregon are Standard 3 and Standard 4. Standard 3 primarily because there is some belief, and a belief that I share in some respects, that at its fundamental, CAPE expects candidates coming into a program, and now they've eased it up a little bit and said it could be any time during the program, but candidates in a program need to basically be in the top 50% of students, both in GPA and in test scores. So they need to have a 3.0 and above 50%. So one of the challenges with Standard 3 is that Standard 3 requires EPPs to do something which is fundamentally opposed to what we're trying to do in Oregon, which is realize that many of the strengths that students and candidates can bring to bear and might make them very successful teachers are not the kind of skills that may show up in a test score or a GPA. So that's a challenge. And then Standard 4, program impact, is also a challenge because it requires measurement of efficacy in a classroom based on teacher performance and performance of the students. Currently in Oregon, as in several states, we're challenged in being able to provide a good statewide data set
that would allow EPPs to be able to most thoroughly evaluate their performance, but also to be able to allow us on staff and the commission to look at it from a comparative lens, because every EPP therefore will have a different means of trying to demonstrate evidence for this standard, and they're going to have to do, for the most part, engage in what CAPE calls case studies in order to be able to find some data that might show the effectiveness of the completers in the classrooms. Okay, next slide, Candace. And please interrupt if you have any questions. So, again, as I mentioned with the standards, AQEP focuses on peer review and CAPE focuses on peer review. However, AQEP tends to focus more on the standards from a holistic sense, where CAPE focuses on evidence and outcomes related to the very specific standards and their components. AQEP is a little more flexible and sensitive to the EPP context, and where CAPE is centered around the accountability and compliance. AQEP is a little bit more qualitative. It's all in the narrative. CAPE is more quantitative in essence of you're demonstrating the satisfaction of the standards by specific pieces of evidence. Now, programs do get to decide, of course, what their assessments might be or what specific evidence they want to provide. But as many of you know, CAPE also has a very specific rubric about determining whether any evidence piece, particularly assessments, would be valid and reliable to meet their requirements. All right, next slide, Candace. Okay, in reporting, both AQEP and CAPE require annual reports to be submitted. They also require what many of us are used to calling self-study reports, though AQEP calls it a quality assurance report, where CAPE provides a template for their work. AQEP doesn't. AQEP wants the EPP, using their own identity and vision and mission, to be able to very carefully engage with the standards and speak to the standards from the perspective of their own context. And then, as they speak to the standards, they are to provide the evidence that supports, bolsters, or even in many cases challenges their goals and their vision for their program, because again, AQEP is focused on the continuous improvement model throughout the process. CAPE, again, I mentioned that they have the 5 specific standards, which is based on evidence of the standards and their components. So next slide, Candace. How does program review work? Well, in this regard, our program review is going to be very similar. We still would have either under AQEP or CAPE a state and SPA reviews, which are allowed for the individual programs. The program review under AQEP may be requested at the time of the unit review. However, this is an item that the state, in working with AQEP, could also work to specialize this and apply it to the Oregon model, where in CAPE, program is evidence of CAPE Standard 1, and therefore what you do is you tend to do it before, and when you do the program unit or the program review before, usually it's about 2 years or so before. And then the goal being is that you go through program review from the state, we give the feedback, we give the approval of programs, and the EPPs use that as evidence towards Standard 1, which is content and pedagogical knowledge. And CAPE, you could still, or AQEP, we could still do that, but their process is flexible enough where the program review piece can be requested as part of unit review or any time before there. And I'm going to mention in a few minutes why that's a very important aspect to consider, because I think there's some misunderstanding regarding that in terms of perceived rigor. Site teams, I won't repeat this verbatim for you because, again, it's all here for you to read. and I just don't want to read to you off a slide, but the big difference with AQUEP is that the visits are conducted virtually, where at CAPE, it's an on-site visit. AQUEP's training is also a little bit more flexible, where CAPE, and several of you have gone through this already, CAPE has a very definite training schedule, and you have to re-up every so many years, and you have to agree to be doing, if you sign up to volunteer, you have to agree to do a program. And with the CAPE team structure, TSPC can appoint up to one team member less than the number of CAPE appointed members. So if a joint team has 7 members, TSPC can appoint up to 3 of them. Now, AQUEP, they look at structuring their sites with visits, but it's not even a site visit, it's a virtual site visit. They structure it in mini teams, and they base it that a mini team of maybe 3 people, 2 of them being AQUEP representatives, and then one being one that the state might select, or the EPP and state might select. They will focus those mini teams on specific programmatic areas. So at Utah State, they had one of their mini teams that focused on teaching preparation, one that focused on administrative preparation, and one that focused on counselor preparation. And those teams needed to be reflect on the entire standards, but they're able to focus just within that particular area. Where when CAPE does a site visit, often what they do is they divvy up the standards so that a particular member maybe doesn't know in depth the full range of standards, but for all the programs will understand one specific standards. There's pros and cons to both. I will say that I actually prefer the smaller teams which focus on an entire range of standards for that smaller program area, because it allows a greater meeting of the minds. So you'll have all 3 of those members will review the entire teaching program or the admin program, where right now there has to be a little bit more back and forth between team members, because if Rayette's doing standard 1, there may be totally somebody different who's doing standard 4, but it sure would be good to know standard 1 if you're going to be making comments about how the EPP is meeting effectiveness requirements. That always seemed a little bit troubling to me about CAPE. Next slide. Site team fees. Now this is potentially a big difference between the two. AQUEP, because they do their visits virtually, they have a $10,000 flat fee plus travel costs as might be needed. And in this case, it could depend on the specifics of the circumstance, or also too if they're focus visits later or whatnot. Where CAPE, being that it is an on-site visit this year, they're at $2,150 for each site visitor, plus $850 per site visitor for expenses. So you can see how if you're a team that has 7 people on it, you can see pretty quickly how that adds up.
Can I,
So,
can I throw something in, Tony?
yeah.
So as we were researching for this, we came to realize a little bit of a nuance, which is the site teams themselves. The Utah one did happen to include a virtual component. That was kind of a last minute thing, I think, and Mark is on the line if we want to check with him on this, but I think the standard site team setup is those are typically on site. But for like Utah, they had a problem and somebody couldn't make it, so they did allow that person to participate remotely, which is not a flexibility that we have seen from CAPE. Alternatively, all of the trainings, for one thing, AQUEP does trainings as needed, and CAPE has done trainings once a year. They pick how many people can attend. There are always way more people that want the training than they can accommodate. So there's always a huge gap of people that can't get the training, and it's required for them to participate on the teams. So
That's true.
Yeah, this is Mark, and I apologize, and Tony, I didn't want to jump in, but Candace, I'll just confirm what you said. AQIP is interested in incorporating virtual elements where we can as part of saving costs, and in this case, it was a team member who couldn't travel because he had a medical procedure and his doctor said he couldn't travel. So we're very open to having virtual, but there are always people on the ground as well. So thank you for that clarification, Candace.
All right. So moving forward to the membership information for the fees for actual the EPPs to join. A lot of it is based on, there's an annual fee in AQIP, and then there's a fee based on the number of program completers that they would have. CAPE is also based on the number of program completers, and you can see the range and the different amounts that are charged there. So CAPE is by and large more expensive. And of course, we know that those costs actually, in one way or the other, they're going to get moved on the students, the completers. Okay, state membership information. This is basically for my office, for Wayne and I. And this is what we need to do as the state to really get set up and have this relationship with these two accreditors. And now we don't have under AQIP, at least not currently, we don't have a membership fee. State, they give us a template, much like CAPE does, on what the contract may look like. However, CAPE, their contract with us is very rigid. I think some of you who've been on the commission for a while recall about a year ago where I actually went back to CAPE and tried to open up for negotiation several of those standards. They were going to have none of that. So CAPE is very rigid in, the little bit you can change within their contract model is not what I would call anything substantive, and it's really nothing that would really help us tailor specific to Oregon. So that's one of the differences there. That's enough for that slide, because I want to get through it real quick here. And then accreditation status. CAPE has been SHIA approved. However, CAPE is also going through the reapproval process now, as I understand it. So even CAPE has to continue to demonstrate their ability to be approved. I can definitely share an opinion with you if you ask about that. And all I will say is that when SHIA comes and asks states how they feel things are going with CAPE, all I'm going to say is it might be better if the SHIA doesn't come and ask me about our experience with CAPE. Now, AQIP currently isn't SHIA approved. However, they are seeking SHIA approved. And that might be something to think about as we move forward, in getting that status. And I think I'm now about the last slide, or that is it. Okay, so those are the slides I have. Now, Candace and Rayette, would you like to share your personal experience?
Rayette, you go first.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. My computer froze for a second there. So Tony, you did a fantastic job of explaining really what we saw on our site visit. I would have to say it was an amazing site visit. As you know, I am very much on the accreditation piece in regards to Oregon. We've set up different meetings in regards to accreditation throughout the state and getting EPPs talking to each other. So it was really interesting hearing a different process that, dare I say, it maybe is not so much compliance-based, but rather after actual continuous improvement. So when I think of our programs and what we want to be doing within the state, I focus so much more on the continuous improvement aspect. So I was highly impressed with the conversations that were happening in regards to continuous improvement and what was actually beneficial for the programs versus compliance. and I'll take questions if there are any. But Candace, you're up.
Okay, I went in honestly thinking it would be a huge headache and hassle to switch to, not switch, and let me be clear about that. We're not talking about eliminating CAPE at all. And as I was sitting there and talking to people, I just thought, man, I wish they had come first, frankly. I think I support entirely what Tony and Ray had said about the focus on continuous improvement. We heard over and over people who had experienced both accrediting bodies talk about the frustrations, the same frustrations I've heard from the Oregon EPPs, that they keep getting pushback and really not very helpful interactions with CAPE, and they would talk about being calm and relaxed going into the site visit. So they're both, in my opinion, very rigorous programs. There's just a very different approach and attitude going in. That's it for me.
All right, so what I would like to do at this time is just share to the committee members my conclusions upon leaving the visit and reflecting on the information we gathered. And I can do it pretty simply in addressing, or by addressing, the one item that I think has started to permeate out there about AQEP. And that is this notion, and I think it's unfortunate because I do think in some ways, some of the EPPs, by the very nature of how they brought up the thought about looking at a different accreditor, there may be that perception out there that, well, AQEP must be an easier way to get accredited then. And I just want to express that I don't believe that. I think that part of it actually I never believed, because I am a qualitative researcher now. And in many respects, AQEP still does require some quantitative data, but of course it's all based on the data. You need to provide a sufficiency of data that demonstrates you're meeting those standards from within your context. Many of us who are qualitative researchers know that it's actually more rigorous to do our research in qualitative work than it is in quantitative. Quantitative work, you can find the data, you spend an awful lot of your time in finding the data, and then doing the number crunching to demonstrate its sufficiency. And then you think, oh, then we'll write a narrative to explain the data. Well, in qualitative research, and how I vision AQEP more, is that you're having at the get-go to be able to analyze and think about your program, again, with its goals, but also where its challenges are. And as you develop that, then you need to go and find the data that helps inform that continuous improvement discussion. So in some ways, what I could see happening, and what I sure hope AQEP would maintain, is that in many cases, I actually think EPPs may need to provide more data than it would require toward a particular standard. Because again, the EPP has to demonstrate under AQEP that all the way from goal consideration and to goal attainment, and then what maybe went wrong with setting this goal, maybe, you know, what would be the next step of this goal, and how are we going to get there and look at it, requires a fair amount of work, as does the type of triangulation and member checking that good qualitative research requires. You know, you have to, as in a qualitative approach, you really have to be able to show, again, multiple measures. So the thought that AQEP is just a narrative is not true, because you have to show multiple measures. I wouldn't ask you to approve AQEP if I thought they could take a very narrative-based approach, but only require either a qualitative or a quantitative response. They do require both. but I do appreciate the qualitative nature of the discussion and how it leads the work that's happening. I also believe that at this time, AQUEP has enough of a following across the country that they are recognized by several states, that I believe they would meet the intention of the statute regarding national creditors. And I also believe that AQUEP does need to do what it has to do to be able to become CHIA approved. I agree with that. I don't necessarily say that they would need to have that CHIA approval status before we might let them operate in Oregon, because I think if we just wait for CHIA, then quite frankly, we're giving away our authority to somebody else. Because I'm a firm believer CHIA shouldn't be the end-all say-all either about what a good accreditor is. And in a way, we already let a lot of we let other agencies look at it and at the programs. And CAPE, by the way, has even encouraged programs to look at other accreditors in the area of school psychology or school counseling. So even CAPE recognizes that they're not necessarily an expert in any particular area. So with those findings that we had, the belief going into the visit, as I think Candice mentioned, is that the three of us were more skeptical going into the visit, where we left the visit being a little bit more optimistic about the program. That what I might recommend to, excuse me, what I might recommend to the PAC is to consider provisionally recommending AQUEP to the full commission, and it being provisional until AQUEP actually does reach CHIA status, and therefore we can continue to monitor it. And we can also, if need be, we can, if AQUEP doesn't produce what we want, we can more easily get out of that than the current CAPE contract we have, which is very rigid. However, I do agree with Candice that we would not totally substitute one for the other. I believe competition is good, and I believe that by having a few more states consider multiple accreditors, I think that will make both accreditors become better. I think AQUEP will have to up its game in order to be able to demonstrate the organizational capacity and what we would often call, what I would call is organizational rigor, because they are a relatively still what I would call from an organizational perspective, a little bit immature of an organization that's growing. Now CAPE, on the other hand, they have all the structure in place, and they definitely have a goal and a mission, and but what CAPE is lacking now, though, is they're lacking adaptability, what I see anyway, to the specific needs of the state. So I think AQUEP in that regard can help CAPE become a little bit more responsive to state needs. So that's my recommendation, is to consider a provisional approval, which would still, it would allow, a provisional approval would allow EPPs to get or go through the AQUEP process. However, the one caveat we would make to the EPPs is for them to realize that since it is a provisional approval, if at any time until AQUEP receives full approval from the commission, that if AQUEP were to go under or the commission were to decide, AQUEP hasn't progressed how it needs to, then the EPP would need to immediately get on schedule to go back to CAPE. So that is my recommendation. Can I answer, or Rayette or Candice answer any questions for the commissioners?
Jessica Barney here. I have a couple of questions, Tony. First of all, I thank you for doing this visit. I'm sure that was time consuming, and it's very interesting from our last board meeting until now. I can see a switch, and I appreciate how open you guys were to staying open-minded to both avenues. But a couple of things. So last we heard from AQUEP, I believe at our board meeting, they had 9 EPP's accreditation. Do we have an update on that, if that has gone up? You said that they have several states now. Does anybody have?
Yes. I'm going to ask Mark if he's online to speak to that. Yeah, Mark, go ahead, and then I'll chime in as needed.
Sure. We do still have the 9 accredited members. Of course, we weren't doing any accreditations over the summer because it's kind of the downtime. And our fall was a little bit low. We had only 1 site visit this semester, so we'll have made our 10th decision within another month. But then we have another 10 site visits in the spring, and then 10 or 11 each for all of the semesters going forward. And then ticking up a little bit the further out we get. So that's still where we are in terms of membership. Since I was in Bend with you all, our membership is now up. We had our 97th member join today, so we're closing in on 100 in terms of members, and scheduling site visits right along.
That's a lot of growth. Thanks for sharing that. I had 2 more questions. One was about, Candace, you mentioned, it sounds like if we decided to make AQUEP an option, along with CAPE, that Tony, I think I remember you saying that if we were doing this, that you would, EPPs, you would decide, like EPPs could request to you if they wanted to try out AQUEP, and then you would be the decision holder on whether they could go with AQUEP or with CAPE. Is that, or are you going to leave that up to EPPs to choose that?
Thank you, Jessica. That's a good question for clarification. So EPPs, I believe, should be entitled to decide which of the accreditation model fits them. However, that is true within reason, and I think there's two important reasons for that. One is that staff needs to be able to organize this work. So in that regard, I would say any EPP, let's say the commission were to move forward and we brought a first version of a rule back in February. I would say that we shouldn't allow any EPP who has a site visit scheduled through spring of 2021, and it may be even fall of 2021, that if they have a CAPE visit, they need to go through that. Because even AQUEP, I think AQUEP said the fastest they've gone through a program switching over has been within about a year. So it's definitely not an escape valve for any program that decides, well, we just don't want to do CAPE tomorrow. Well, it's not going to be that way. And the other rationale, and that's why, another reason why I suggest we look at provisional approval, because with provisional approval, I think it'll give the commission in this first round, of course, and this is all if the commission approves it, because the commission can give me in my office as much or as little of the discretion as needed. But I would say, depending on the program and where program approval has been, with some of the programs that we might, in these first few go-arounds, that we might suggest that a program not try to do the switch right away, because it may well be that some of the AFIs or the conditions that we have within their program approval status are going to be more indicative and were developed with the CAPE standards in mind. So I would request as part of this that, we look at some date certain with which when you could decide that an AQUEP visit would be appropriate, and that there is some staff responsibility for determining if the program is at the right place, if they're currently on an accreditation cycle, to therefore do the switch.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And then my last question was about CHIA, I know that they're in the process for that, and I'm trying to remember, but I'm wondering if somebody can give me a quick refresher on the downfalls of not being certified with CHIA. What is that? Just like a couple of quick for EPP with the downfalls.
Yes. Yeah, so CHIA is, the way to look at CHIA is they're the accreditor of accreditors. Mm. So they're this collective group of a lot of the national accreditation bodies, and many of them are the ones you think, like the American Psychological Association, some of the nursing the national nursing boards and whatnot, and they allow this CHIA organization to basically set standards on how they believe accreditors should work. And the institution or the accreditors who want to become CHIA members and get approval, they have to also go through an accreditation process where they collect materials, demonstrate their plans. They have to be open for inspection by CHIA members. And if they get accredited or approved by CHIA, they also have to re-up every so many years, just like our EPPs do. So, and right now, CHIA has in the last several months rolled out their new accreditation model, so how they're going to look at accreditors. And I believe that AQEP's going to be within that those new required guidelines. So, Mark, you can confirm that?
Yes, that's right. We're going to be in the group going through the first reviews with the new standards and the new policies.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a quick question. This is Erica. At our BEN meeting, commission meeting, I think we had, it was an impromptu session where we had some of the EPPs come and talk with us about the need to have additional avenues for accreditation. And I think that's what prompted the visit with Tony and Candace. So now that we've had a little bit more of information and we have some EPPs on the line, would it be appropriate for us to hear from them now that Tony has shared a little bit more of their thoughts with the two accreditation bodies?
Thank you, Erica. And I, of course, would defer to Chair Weitzel, who gets to decide that as the chair of the committee. I would suggest it would be a lot, because as I've shared, I want to maintain the integrity of the committee. And I believe the commission should also maintain the integrity of the committee. So in that regard, I would say it'd be better to hear from the EPPs now than last minute at the commission.
Tony, this is Bruce. Yeah, I agree with that and what Eric is requesting. I just want to make sure before we do, Eric, on that, if you have any other questions, or Sam, if you have any others that we could for Tony on this presentation, and then we can hear from EPPs if we'd like.
No more questions from me.
Okay. Tony, I have one or two, and just because the details, we're talking in generalities here, and I think the real question is, are we going to recommend this provisional approval to the full commission? Let me ask the question, if an EPP were to begin the CAPE process, and they have to be approved by 2025 or accredited by then, and things didn't look like it was going too well, are we going to have the option to step out of one approval route and go to AQEP as long as it can be completed by 2025, or is the commission going to hold the EPPs to a pretty stringent time frame for our own visitations, et cetera? Because we do have that joint agreement with CAPE as an example, where program approval comes first.
Yes. So what I would suggest, Bruce, is that we don't do anything, if we do provisional approval, we don't do anything that would disrupt the currently approved schedule. Again, and that's being a little selfish because Candace and Wayne have to manage all this stuff. So that's why I would say there's a group that wouldn't be able to do it because, quite frankly, you know, I think I'd probably recommend not until fall 2021. So any program that has CAPE before fall 2021 would need to keep doing CAPE. And then if a program who would come up after 2021 wants to move to AQEP, of course, they do it at their own peril, which is kind of the same with CAPE anyway, you know, because if they don't make CAPE, they don't get accredited, right? And two, if they need to make that switch in time enough that they can meet the set dates we already have for their current visits. So if, you know, if a program's up in 2023 and they decide to go to AQEP, they better not decide for a fall 2023 visit. They better not come back and say in spring of 20, or let's say, yeah, spring of 23 or even fall of 22, they better not come and say, oh, all of a sudden now we want to do AQUEP. One, because that's not going to give them enough time really to do an AQUEP preparation. And two, it would require us to start playing around with the schedule. And Bruce, especially you know how challenging it is to really maintain the integrity of that schedule. So there would be limitations on when and how an institution could make that change.
Right, I was just thinking that one of the things we might want to stipulate as we go forward is, because you could take, well, we could take ourselves, University of Portland, where we have a site visit next fall. And let's say we were not successful with CAPE. And during the time, the intervening time, we found that AQUEP looked to be much more appropriate for our kind of unit program review. And we said, gosh, we want the same opportunity as everybody else coming after us, just based on where we are in the line. We would like to switch now, having been program approved, and do our unit approval with AQUEP. Even would an institution be allowed to do that? If, and I hear you saying no, so I think we just have to be very clear about that, that if you have already headed in one direction, that's the direction you will follow through in. Or if not, what would be the criteria for making that switch potentially? You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Bruce, I would, because you know how, again, how the schedule's pretty packed, and quite frankly, we can't handle probably more than 3 visits in any one term. So as, so like, let's say we have a program that goes through CAPE again in 2023, and let's say they don't make CAPE. And then they come back and say, well, you know we needed to be accredited by 2025, but you know, so now we want to do, we have a year and a half to do AQUEP. Can we do it? Well, I think as part of this, the commission should also put a cap on how many visits it can manage in a term, except for the focus visits, which are our own doing as a commission, in order to be able to provide the good quality service and the integrity to the system that's necessary. So the second question is going to be, well, then what about what happens to that program then that in 2023 fails CAPE, and then we won't let them do AQUEP because there's no more slots available. I mean, if there were slots available, right, then I would say, okay, let's have the discussion. There's no more slots available. They have to come up to their next cycle or the next nearest opportunity. And it wouldn't be basically a date of their choosing, because it's going to be dependent upon our scheduling. And that leaves then that it could be a program, and there could be a program who doesn't meet CAPE that on July 1, 2025 would not be nationally accredited. And that would be a decision then, based on my recommendation to the full commission, whether to let that program continue on some kind of conditional status, limited status, or some kind of, or the commission could go as full as saying a closeout program. So I think there are steps that we would take. Again, it's really about making sure we keep the integrity of unit approval and the integrity of our visit schedule.
Right. I just see the need for, as we're going through this transition period, of potentially offering a second avenue for accreditation. That what we do is because in our situation, we take Lewis and Clark as well. We go through now. We're not going to 2023. Because we're before that fall 2021. We could go through approval in 2020, or they could be going through right now, find that it's lacking in some way, or not liking the response that CAPE gives to us, finds it too stringent, too esoteric, and say, look, we want to go in a different direction. We've got 4 years to do that. Are you going to allow us to? And I think that's where I'm saying to you, I think we need to, as we roll this out, because we'll have options now, that we give real clear guidance to those EPPs so that they know, yes, you can, no, you can't, or it's going to be based on slots or whatever it might be. So the criteria just needs, it's just something to think about as if this were to move forward. That's my reason for pulling it up right now. Okay?
No, that's a good point, Bruce. Thank you.
Okay. Jessica, Erica, Sam, I don't hear any other questions. unless you have some right now, let's honor what Erica, you've requested, and any EPPs online that would like to give their thoughts, or if you have a question, perhaps let's entertain them now.
Bruce,
Yes.
this is Julie, and similar to you, we're in the early part of the timeline.
Right.
And we're prepared for CAPE. I'm not concerned about not being able to get CAPE approval. But the changes that we've had to make to align to CAPE haven't necessarily been what the faculty thought were in the best interest of the program or necessarily the students. So assuming we would be able to get approved by CAPE, it sounds like, you know, when can you switch to AAQEP, right? So like, when I think about standard 3.2, the admission standard is one of our biggest hangups, that ACT, SAT, and we have enforced it to make sure that we meet the CAPE requirements. We would like to stop enforcing it, you know, as soon as possible. And so I guess, you know, that's one of the other considerations. Like, even if you get CAPE approved and you want to switch, when can you stop following some of the rules, I guess, that don't fit, and make that transition? So just thinking about those pieces that kind of conflict with what the program's value, and they've done it. And I'm sure a lot of other institutions are in the same place where they've put in new rules or new assessments to meet this mark.
That's a good point, Julie, because as you well know too, it isn't just a 1 year, let's get ready for accreditation. You start the very next year for 7 years, you're ramping up, especially in those last 3 or 4 years. So you'd want to know what you were ramping up to. So be able to get approval that you're going in a different direction. So, okay.
I would say what we would do is, this is Tony, we would create a process of notice whereby, let's say U of O is accredited in, what's your date, Julie? Is it fall 21?
No, we're spring 2021, right?
Okay. Yeah. Spring 2021, U of O gets accredited by CAPE. They come to the commission, they get approval for their unit. I would say that when they provide notice to the commission of their intent to move to AQUEP, and they demonstrate that they've become a member institution of AQUEP, it's at that point, and that could be like 2 months afterwards. If they provide the notice to the commission and document their membership in AQUEP, I don't think we as a commission could tell them they couldn't do that. And I'm okay with that.
Okay, we're a dual member now, but yeah. So we will.
You would then, in that case, Julie, what you would do is you would want to notify formally, you know, have Randy send something that says that we will no longer follow the CAPE guidelines and we will just follow AQUEP accreditation standards.
Yeah, that's my, you know, just trying to figure out how that will all phase out, you know, as we transition. So that's helpful. You know.
Okay, so Tony, just to clarify for me too on that part, because I think this is really a pretty salient point. If you're not EPP, you probably don't care about this part of the conversation, but let's say that Julie, University of Oregon, you go through, you're found to be extremely competent in all areas, all 5 of the standards of CAPE, with the exception of maybe 3.1, you know, the SATs didn't work out, whatever. And they make a recommendation and say you need to, within 6 months time period or whatever, or 2 years, make these changes to be fully up to speed. Is it, Tony, going to be required then that whatever EPP, that they follow through with their initial recommendations are made to be fully approved before they can jump to the other route?
Yeah, I would say, and this is Bruce Ware, I know this is the one part where it becomes tricky, and this is where you have to do the math of the years, okay? Yeah. Because let's say they're CAPE, okay? So let's say Julie's program's approved, but they have it's conditional approval,
right?
Okay? Or I would say with ASIs, no, but if they had some kind of conditional or probationary approval, and if then, let's say then they decide to join AQUEP, but if they could not get fully, and this is where again they would do it at their own peril. If they can't get fully approved and accredited by AQUEP by the July 1, 2025 date, they then would not have technically met the requirements to be fully nationally accredited by July 1, 2025, because they wouldn't have satisfied their condition.
Yeah, what I'm pushing on is just a little bit of the fact that, let's say we end up with a stipulation, or Kate finds us wanting to the point that they're saying, you really are going to have an immediate follow-up visit within X number of months or a year or two.
Yeah.
But you're on the ropes and you're not doing well, and you're going to have to really make some major changes to meet your accreditation under Kate. Would we be able to, at that time, given the new option of having 2 routes, say, we never liked Cape anyway, let's go to AQUEP, because we believe in what their philosophy is, and had we been given that opportunity before, we would have gone that route. Is the commission going to honor that? And that's all I'm saying, because we now have an alternative. And when can the alternative be exercised is really the question here. Because I can see us or anybody else saying, I don't like what Kate, and rather than going back and meeting with our board and taking our argument to them, we'll just pack up and go across the street to AQUEP.
Yeah, that would be something we'd have to watch, because remember, at the end of the day, yes, it's accreditation, but it's also the state approval. And if they were given stipulations, and we put this into our recommendations, if they're given stipulations, we basically, as the commission, we pick up those stipulations as part of the unit approval. So even if they were no longer, let's say they decided to quit their CAPE membership and join AQUEP, because I believe if they quit their CAPE membership, they would not be entitled to have a follow-up visit if they've already quit CAPE, formally given them notice. However, that doesn't mean that we as the state would still not hold them to that, because it would be a condition of our statewide unit approval.
Okay.
So we would need to, check that stipulation.
Bruce, I'm raising my hand. I don't know how to do that virtually, but this is Mark.
Okay, yeah, Mark, go ahead.
I'll just say AQUEP has, had to address some of these issues in the states where we're doing a lot of work, especially in New York. So there's a spot in the template of the agreement with the state where we actually say we can make a special sort of provision if there's an EPP that has a known issue or a particular thing that they know they need to work on, state knows they need to work on. We've actually set up contracts with a couple of places in New York with the state ed department, which is the relevant authorizer. So I don't mean to go into all that now, only to say, if tough situations like that come out, we've been sort of picking through some of that with some other states, and that little aspect in the template for the partnership agreement is sort of meant to say, well, we can have an avenue to work on that and to make sure that everybody's satisfied, specify what the evidence is, specify a reporting timeline. So there's a mechanism there that we'll have a little bit of track record with by the time we get a little ways down the road here, because we're doing it already.
Great, okay. Well, that's just something I know, Tony, you, Wayne, we'll have to, I know EPPs will be interested in that, depending on where you are in line, so to speak, and what the time frame is. But even at that point, at what point can you exercise the option of going to the second alternative, whichever way it is? And that, I think that's just important. Okay, any other EPP questions out there?
Bruce, this is Sharon from Lewis and Clark.
Right.
I would just say that, so we have our joint CAPE TSPC site visit in about 6 weeks. And even given that, I know that we continue to be supportive of the direction of this conversation and appreciative of the state continuing to look at multiple accreditors, but also with the depth of the vetting process that you all are doing. So just to say we appreciate and support the direction that this conversation is going.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sharon. Others that might be out there. Okay, this is my wait time. I've given it. Let's I think, commissioners, what I'd like to do is, the question is really before us, and Tony, stop me if you want to add anything else. This would be the appropriate time before I ask the question, but is there anything else you'd like to add to this?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, good. The real issue before us is, we've seen the language in the agenda, but do we, does the PAC recommend to the full commission that the agency give and I think the term that you used, Tony, was recommend provisional approval of AQUEP, and that would be our recommendation to the commission then, as a second accreditor for the state of Oregon EPPs. And if I could, I'd just go ahead and we'll just do a quick roll call that way, so we make sure we have it for the record. Sam, how do you vote on that?
I'm comfortable with the recommendation. Aye.
Okay. All right. Erica?
I support the recommendation as well.
Okay, and Jessica?
Yes. Thanks.
Okay, and I do as well, so it's unanimous, Tony, for the record that way, to take it forward as a provisional recommendation for approval.
Okay, so the next step will be we go to the commission, ask for, we mentioned what the PAC is moving forward, and the next steps after that will be, because the delineation of the accreditor is within the way rules are currently. If the commission approves going that route, then the next step will be to move forward on changing the rules.
Right.
So, and that goes through the normal rulemaking process, and that'll be okay. But it wouldn't necessarily prohibit a program from going ahead and starting to make progress towards there. It's just the formality that rules have to be approved.
Right. You will probably make the same presentation or something similar in terms of the PowerPoint to the full commission, I take it? Or could you do it?
Yes, but I would, my hope would be, and this is where I would ask the PAC members, because you can imagine with the full commission, if we have this lengthy of a discussion, we'll be there with all our eye forever. But this is, again, this is why we have these committee meetings, right? Because we get to really hash these out. Yeah. And if with a strong recommendation from, you know, from the PAC chair taking that to the full commission, you know, and this is one of the things I'm working on with the commission, is that then there's some credence given to those PAC recommendations.
Okay. All right. Moving right along. Let's move to multiple measures, and this too, Tony, is yours. We do know that we've got 4 options on the table right now for content knowledge in particular, and there's a 5th possible option which we've seen. So I'll let you take it from there.
All righty, and I'm pulling up that item, and I got it. Okay. So Candace, if you pulled up the option 5 holistic assessment attachment.
Yes, actually, Wayne's on the keyboard. I'm doing notes.
Somebody's got some music going on back there.
Can you hear the train?
Yeah, no, I'm good. All righty.
Can everyone see it?
No, I got it. So option 5, holistic assessment of content knowledge. As Bruce mentioned, we currently have the 4 methods of demonstrating content knowledge. The first 2 of them are really the current practice, well, the then current practice of either passing the test, or if you were in what they called a program required area, so such as special ed, elementary, that you did the program, okay? And in some cases as well as the test. So those 2 options were kind of the status quo. And then what we added were options 3 and 4. Option 3 being what I would call the pure academic coursework option, where you basically earn enough credits in the delineated standards or the domains of the particular endorsement area. And then option 4 was the combination of test score, GPA in the content area, and clinical assessment. And depending on the combination of what points values you got there, you may demonstrate content mastery that way. And then when we approved the framework, you notice that on the bottom there was that little circle for option 5, which was a holistic assessment, and that I mentioned I was going to bring back to you in November. And this draft of what I have here is what I am looking at. Doing a draft of a holistic assessment is, of all the options, definitely the most challenging. Because when you're looking at a holistic assessment, you're thinking about the reality of it is you may have documented evidence, but it's still ultimately at some point, it becomes somebody's subjective determination that does that evidence end up holistically demonstrating that knowledge. So there's a few, with that understanding, there's a few principles that come to mind. One is that this is not something that any one individual can decide, because you need, again, like I mentioned with qualitative work, you require a little bit more triangulation. Two, this is an option which is different. So since it does take into account some subjectiveness, that it requires, in many respects, kind of like what we're talking about with AQUEP, those who think this is an easier option, I think they have, it's not. It's just a different option. There's the way I've worked on this with the team is that this option, if it's done correctly, stands to actually be more rigorous. And I'll get into it why, especially if you look at just the length of this one example I have here. So here's the fundamentals of it. Fundamental belief is that if a candidate can gain experience that provides them a solid foundation knowledge in several different ways. Some ways can be purely academic. Some ways could be through alternative learning activities, such as internships and extended program work, apprenticeships, whatnot. They can also gain knowledge by just years of work experience, if it's enough. It also would recognize that there could be what we would call, and I'm moving to the second page. We'll come back to the first page. Or actually, I'm moving to page 3, but we'll come back to that. There could be verified, okay, I mentioned coursework, which is, that's academic work. Alternative academic learning, which would include like apprenticeships and protracted internships. Then there's verified work experience, which again, as I mentioned, would be that on-the-job actual work experience in the content area, and the teaching experience, which would be, because we do have some people that may, because remember, this model would be a model that would apply to everybody. So it's got to, it's got to be able to consider that there may be a lot of people who've done a lot of work, or this could be also the case of an educator who's been in a foreign country and definitely could not pass. Maybe they've taught 10 years in integrated science, but they can definitely not pass the test. This could be a means of them helping to show that they have experience doing that work. And the fifth one, which is the one that I think could be the most challenging, would be the cultural practice. This is probably the most robust forward thinking of the columns. And this is the recognition that depending on, this is what I would call the lived experience column. And I'm going to use the best example I know, which is where a lot of this discussion happens, is with our Native American, our tribal relationship. We know that there's many cultures out there where learning doesn't happen specifically in a classroom, and it doesn't happen as part of an academic exercise. Learning happens as part of the cultural lived practice. For instance, I would say in a field such as biology or agriculture, that what a Native American individual might learn through their cultural experience would provide a content knowledge base that is actually more applicable K-12 student learning than would be just saying that you completed a set of classes. For instance, most Native American tribes do as part of your heritage, as part of growing up in your culture, you become acclimated to the way natural systems work. I will say, because I've studied this as well, Native American, and I'm not saying this is all of it, because again, it would have to be verified, but I've understood and I've worked with Native Americans who learn more about ecology and botany through their lived experience with their tribal members, you know, working with their grandparents, to be working with tribal leaders. It could be working on issues relevant to the reservation, that they have gained knowledge in a particular area. So there's these 5 basic ideas about where knowledge can be gained. And with these, that I believe if they can demonstrate, a candidate can demonstrate competence in the standards through a combination of these 5 areas, then that could be something that I would believe the commission should consider. And some would say then, okay, well then how do we make sure they're really addressing the standards? Well, right now, when you take a test, when you take the Orella test, there are, like for instance, the integrated science, the example here, there's the domains of the nature of science, there's physical science, life science, and geoscience. And within those domains, there's several themes. So under nature of science, there's principles of scientific inquiry, history and nature of science, and then I think STEM relationships, okay? That's a theme. And then within that, and these are adapted from the Orella testing frameworks. And so if you looked at the Orella test preparation materials, they would show that these are all the areas that are within the standard that would be assessed. These are all things that the commission has proved as part of their testing program. So even within principles of scientific inquiry, so if you're looking on page 12 or page 3, that under nature of science, principles of scientific inquiry, you see 6 different standards. 1, demonstrate knowledge of the principles and procedures for designing and carrying out scientific investigations. Okay. What we would require under this is that for the majority of those 6 standards, and I'll tell you why it's not all of them, but the majority in a minute, but for the majority of those 6 standards under A, principles of scientific inquiry, that this collective group, a committee, so to speak, that the EPP puts together, will sign the various boxes about where the candidate has demonstrated sufficient knowledge. What would go in the box would be a reference to the actual artifact number that is then collected in an overall candidate portfolio. So this basically becomes an index of all the ways that this person is meeting and demonstrating competency in the knowledge base. And it could be like under A1, it could be that it's through a few different ways. But at the end of the day, what has to happen is that the people on this group, which has to be, if you look at the signature page on the bottom, it has to be at least 3 people, that at the end of the day, they believe that for that A1 standard, that they, by that combination, that they've demonstrated they know this. Now, A1 happens to be something they're probably going to definitely pick up in academic coursework. But there's other of these standards, if you read through all of them, that you can see could easily be adaptable to other types of learning. So why did I say majority and not all? Well, because the Orella test, pass the Orella test does not require that you pass all of these individual standards. The Orella test includes all the standards when it designs the test for like nature of science and within principles of scientific inquiry, but it could be that a person does not know every one of the standards and pass that section. It's just a matter of numbers. So truly, equity would say that if a person demonstrates knowledge in the majority of 1A, principles of scientific inquiry, if they can demonstrate the majority of those standards are met, then they have demonstrated what I would call, the novice teacher level of content knowledge expected of that beginning teacher. So, and this goes on for each. So they would have to demonstrate that for 1A. They would have to demonstrate it for B1 through B1 through I think B goes through 4. The STEM relationships. So it would go through all of those, and they would have to demonstrate that knowledge. And then they would go on to the physical science domain. And then they would have to demonstrate that. So now I'm on page 4. Under physical science, theme A is the property of matter. Well, they would have to demonstrate that through those 6, I believe it's 6 standards, that they, through the combination, that they demonstrate knowledge of properties of matter. And this would go so forth. So they would have to collect this documentation or these artifacts. They would have to present them to this committee, and it would be specific people in the committee that are responsible for saying those columns of knowledge acquisition are sufficient. So that's why on the colored version, you see there's one that's kind of a rose color, or 2 columns are rose color, 1 column's light blue, and one's a light green. Well, for the coursework and alternative academic learning columns, the person that would need to attest that those listed artifacts are sufficient is a university faculty member within the program area, the endorsement area. So if they want to get, this is an example of integrated science, but there'd be one for biology. And they would have to have a person who's a life science faculty member say, when I reviewed this person's coursework and alternative academic learning, as they've listed in this matrix, that I would say for those 2 columns, it's demonstrating sufficient knowledge. Teaching experience would have to be signed off and documented by either a school administrator or a teacher who's licensed in the particular area. And if for the green ones, so verified work experience and cultural practice, this would have to be signed by somebody, and this is interesting because this is the one that could vary depending on what the experience of the candidate is. So it could be, and this would be the EPP program lead signs it on behalf of a committee or assessment team in consultation with subject area experts. Now, because it varies depending on the situation, I would say the subject matter expert for work experience would be a boss who knows how that work is applied or that knowledge is applied in the work. And the cultural experience, again, I'll go back to the Native American example. Well, if they're saying that through their cultural experience they picked up this knowledge base, then it would have to be somebody within the tribe who has knowledge of how that tribe, basically how they inculcate their tribal members, or specifically this candidate, because again, it might not be all tribal members, but it's the tribal member who's saying, I think I've got enough cultural experience of these that I think it demonstrates some content knowledge. Well, whoever that person is, in this specific case, it might be an elder. My likelihood, I think it would likely be the person who's the education director at each of the tribes. And the tribes have education departments that would sign off and say, yes, and the cultural experience of this person, we believe that they've gained some knowledge. Now remember, it's not that it's just saying that just because that they have evidence in one spot means it's good enough. So when you look at by and large across all the domains, all the themes, all the standards that and when looked at holistically on the whole, that there's a group of people now who have reviewed the artifacts that this candidate has put together to demonstrate knowledge in these areas. And then at the end, so you go down all the way to the last page, each of those members has to sign based on their position. So, and I actually color coded it. So the first signature is by the EPP person, who's based on the subject matter experts. The second section has to be signed by a faculty member who, or no, not the faculty member, either a school administrator or a teacher in the content area who can say that there is, verifies that this teaching experience is quality in that area. And then the third would be the coursework and alternative learning. So this would have to be signed by a faculty member in the endorsement area. So you can see when we put this together, I wanted to make it very rigorous. And if you look at how many pages this is, and if you look at, because remember, for the majority of the standards in each one of those themes, they're going to have to collect this information and have these people sign off on all this stuff. And if you think that this one alone on integrated science goes for 7 pages, that I will say the process of going through that learning experience in itself, I think is going to be as rigorous at the end of the day as, doing the coursework. Now, some would say, well, yeah, but it's subjective and that. Well, okay. One thing I can never guarantee, how authentic and true people are to the system. I would suggest to the PAC members that this system as developed is valid because it does look at a holistic assessment of everything that's going on. The challenge that we would need to do as this commission staff would be to make sure that the EPPs are not fudging with this work that they're making, and that's why they sign it too. And I would go after anybody if a teacher later told a principal that they just had this person sign it before it was completed, I would go after that person. And because I'm very strict in this, I would say I would go after them for a criminal fraud because that is, they're lying on a licensure, basically a licensure assessment. So I mean business when I do this because as I've shared with you all, is that the last thing I'm going to do is let somebody go around and say that we made standards easier for the kids of color. Because I said, as a person of color myself, I won't take that crud. So I hope you can see as you read through this, hopefully you've had a chance to read through it, that it's pretty, there's some hoops that they're going to have to go through with this. And of course, this material is available for audit by staff at any time. So if the PAC likes the general theme of this, what I would ask, the 2 questions that are up that I would say the PAC members would need to determine is, 1, if you have them go through this holistic assessment, would you still require them as part of this assessment to at least attempt the Orella exam? My recommendation doesn't come forward either way, but I do think it's a question that the PAC should consider. I see pros and cons to both. Pros would be is if you have them do even though they're going to do the holistic assessment, if you have them do the Orella test, I think it could help those advisors work through this matrix because they could sign off, and if there are themes in areas that they've already met, they can just cross the line and say this Orella standard is sufficient. The con to it would be is there's going to be some point where if you still require the people to do everything that is required of your first option anyway, at some point you really truly can't call it a holistic assessment anymore. So I'm either way with that. So that's the first question. The second question would be is and this one I do have a recommendation on, which is I think this one, actually it's going to become a recommendation when I come back to you in July on probably all of the multiple measures. is I would want the candidate to be able to attest that if they use a multiple measure, that for 3 years, their first 3 full-time years of teaching after licensure, that TSPC and the EPP may request student redacted information on their achievement. Because I think the commission deserves to understand, again, this would put the commission, this would put Oregon at the forefront of this work. The commission, I believe, deserves to be able to know if this work is if this work is positively impacting our students. And if we don't have the candidates attest to this, then more likely what happens is they go into their districts and then they're gonna, and I'm not trying to say anything against anybody here, so please don't take offense. But we all know that once you're working in the district, unless there's some other legal requirement, that you're gonna follow the procedures that are established through the collective bargaining agreement. And many of those procedures might make it difficult to get the kind of data that the commission would need to be able to determine if these methods are being successful in student learning. So I think that's another thing. If you notice that, I hope the one impression I give to all of you is that really, no matter what the instrument looks like, test or option 5, that it needs to be rigorous. And it needs to be that we hold not only the EPPs, but ourselves accountable to this. Because again, it's for none of us who are on this phone call today. It's all for the K-12 student who's learning. So with that, I will shut up now, and I will gladly answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Commissioners, do you have any questions for Tony?
This is Jessica Barning here. I don't have any questions, Tony. I just want to say thanks. I know this has been a long process, and I feel like I understood it as well at the last board meeting, and this is just reaffirming a lot of the stuff that you've gone over. And I just appreciate your time and energy on this.
Thank you.
Erica, Sam, any questions?
I don't have any questions, but I mean, Tony did ask a question. Are we about to debate that, whether we would require the Arella in addition to the holistic measures? I don't know if we were discussing that, but that was a good question and got me thinking.
I think
so. What I might suggest is let's see if we can answer any questions from the people in the meeting, and then I think we then tackle the 2 hanging questions.
Okay, perfect.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Sam, do you have any questions for Tony?
No questions. I thought the presentation was thorough, and it's obviously a rigorous measure.
Okay, Tony, I've got a couple that there are not so much questions, but maybe as we kind of hone this down, I see the purpose of this meeting really, and I appreciate as a first blush taking a look at this. Some things we might want to answer or consider in taking it to the full commission, so we don't have these questions asked there. One is, what would the issue for? I can see it for the science part here, and I understand. I kind of like the matrix is a comprehensive matrix. How do you see it working for multiple subjects? If I'm talking biology, I know what those domain areas are, etc. Multiple subjects could be a little bit more interesting. And I haven't really looked at the test for that, but it's subtest 1 and 2, there's, all of that. So any thoughts on that?
And Bruce, this would be, if I follow the paradigm of this holistic measure, then what's going to happen is if they want to do it with multiple measures, if you take all the standards of the multiple areas, it's going to be a lot longer than this 7 or 8 pages. And on the columns for the coursework and alternative learning, yes, the EPP will have to work with the candidate to find university level faculty in the, I would say at least in the 4 core domains. Well, actually 5, because they would need the math, science, social studies, language arts or English, and somewhere in the finer performance arts. So again, this is a very rigorous process, I think.
Right.
It can be done, but I don't know. Does that sound, I know that's a lot, Bruce, but does that sound like that would make sense?
Yeah, I'm not really looking for an answer. I'm raising it so that as you prepare this, because I think you're going to get asked that question, because half your candidates, a good chunk of them, would be coming through in elementary interested areas, and so that's the multiple subjects part. The other one that I'd want to be prepared for would be the greater reliability across EPPs that you alluded to, so that it isn't so much just finding, because remember, this is that whole thing of the field audit, which Wayne's going to be talking about too shortly. Every 7 years checking to find out if you were accurate or not. That's a long time waiting. I think we'd want to make sure that whatever process we use, we were consistent across all EPPs, because otherwise you've got a pretty hit and miss. I mean, I could really be off from what Sharon's going to be doing. Not that I ever am. The other question would be, what about the non-Arella test programs? And I know we're looking at drama, et cetera, but music, some of those others where there isn't Arella standards necessarily for them. Do we have a matrix for those areas? Would they be allowed to go through this process? And if so, how would they do it? That's not you don't have to answer that. I'm just saying, unless you have an answer, that's the question. Okay.
Definitely. Yeah.
All right. The other is, it does look like, and I think if I were sitting out here as a neutral EPP, this is a significant shift to the workload at the EPP, playing out the role of determining whether or not across this matrix, you're going to be collecting all the data, all the information, and making that decision. So you've got to get a committee together, you've got to have a faculty member potentially there, and I noticed that some of the information comes from even oral presentations, essays to be read, portfolio artifacts, letters from elders and supervisors, etc. That's a significant shift to a workload from the agency to the EPP, and I think not that we wouldn't do it. It's just that I think that's going to be. We may want to talk about that a little bit more. I do like the idea, I'll just jump in on this, the Arella test, taking it, because, and I don't know if you thought about this part of it, I'm not sure it would work, but if you took the Arella test in those areas that there was a test, and you got the analysis back, you could find out what you didn't pass, what standards were not met fully. Those areas could then be addressed by this kind of a matrix, rather than all areas, if you allow them to take that test first. That's one possibility. And it would cut down on the amount of artifacts, et cetera, that you'd have to have come in. I don't know, was that thought about at all, or was that a possibility?
Yeah, I thought about that, Bruce. Now, the one thing we'll have to do, and this is something that gets done administratively, is that when you get to the level of the individual themes, I don't believe Pearson's going to give you that specific passing score. They do give you, though, at that level, you can find out how well, you can find out how well they did, but you won't get a specific, we think this is, so they don't do cut scores at the individual theme level, but they do give, the data on the, the passing of questions in those areas. So what we would do is, for this administratively, I would work with the Pearson people, or in the case of the ETS test, I would work with them to make that determination about it, because it'll be based on the number of questions in the area and whatnot. So that's more of an administrative task. But I would say, if you were to require them to take the Arella, I would suggest then that if there are areas that group believes that, and we have, at some point there is a little bit of trust, if that group believes that candidate through that testing has met that area, then I think that should be accepted, because, in a way, we would accept that from the test taker.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's, I offer that question, but I also realize the other side of the other edge of that knife really says, that might be the way then that all candidates would look at getting through licensure. If they took the test solely, determined what areas they didn't pass or they weren't significantly capable of demonstrating on the test, that they were competent, they would then go back and require, that could increase the amount of time and effort that each EPP is looking at. But I don't want to create that, but at the same time, I know what the matrix is looking at. I can, these are pretty long, and I'm not sure that, you know, you get a lot of candidates necessarily that would provide all that. The second thing that's on my mind is, this is similar to what we're using for teacher leadership, and scoring those as part of the PAC, or the group that I'm on, it takes a look at those. We've had to return quite a few because they just did not meet, you know, standard on this. I mean, it was the same person was signing off on several of these, or one experience was covering several of the standards and the subpoints. So I think that's just kind of a comment on the side, but when you have a matrix like this, you're really going to have to be very careful about what that standard, how you're going to show at what level that portfolio, that essay, all of those things. There's a rubric for it that is consistent and that is meaningful. So a lot of work.
Yeah.
But okay.
Yeah, and I would do that if this gets approved. And you know this, Bruce, how like rubric and all that development works, is then if this methodology gets approved, what happens is that I would again work with a group of the EPP specialists to chat about, okay, so what are we saying are the best practices in this work? And so we would do that, and that way it's also a peer-driven approach. I really do believe, Bruce, and you hit the nail on the head, that most candidates who take the Arella, I would still say, unless they were only short on maybe like one standard that they just totally blew, I would probably say that they would still probably do before, they would probably do one of the other options before this, because like we've said, it's a lot of work here.
Yeah. Okay. With that, just the questions and issues I wanted to raise. Are there any others from the audience in terms of you'd like to either ask Tony or raise as we look at moving this forward? Now, Sharon, I know you're out there.
Thank you, Bruce. I am. And my only question would be next steps. I think if PAC approves that, it goes to the commission, and then a work group would be convened if it's approved at all those levels.
Yeah, what I would do, it would be approved, okay? But, you know, as when you administer programs, and it's kind of like how option 4 is right. You know, there's a few universities that have sent me their clinical assessment to get approved, and I'm sure more are coming. And it would be the same here. Once the commission's okay with it, it's going to be staff working with stakeholders that's going to actually be able to put enough clarity to it that it's, as Bruce mentioned, we can assure reliability, mutual reliability across the EPPs, because I'm sure all of you are going to want to make sure that you're holding each other accountable to this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Sharon. Other questions out there? Okay. Hearing none. We have before us, commissioners, the question that we do we at this point believe this assessment would fairly and adequately address the content standards for licensure, and that's a yes or no. And if it's yes, we want to move it forward as a fifth option for the full commission to consider for approval. So Sam, you can answer the first and or second in one answer, or you can take both.
Yes and yes.
Okay. Erica?
Same thing, yes and yes.
Okay, and Jessica?
Yes and yes, I'm excited about this.
Okay. I'll add my 2 yeses to that as well. So we have 8 yeses, and I appreciate that. Okay, all right. So Tony, we'll move this forward to the full commission for consideration and approval.
Yeah, Bruce, the 2 things that I can just go on consensus from you all is, what about the Arella test? Maybe just a quick show of the committee member. Do they believe a relative should be required as this?
Okay.
And then the second would be, are you okay with me putting as part of this something about being able to collect data to determine the quality of this instrument later?
Yeah, I think you could add that. I think if it's approved, I think that's an evaluation piece that should be there for all of the options. I think you had mentioned that before anyway, if I'm not mistaken. So I think you have the right, Tony, to say, look, as part of, once it's approved, it becomes official doctrine for the commission or for the agency that we'll do a program evaluation of it, and here's what it's going to look like. So I think I would certainly support your right to do that. We can require it, we can say, or we recommend it strongly. Let me ask the commissioner, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's good, thank you.
Okay, commissioners, what about the option of requiring that the Arella test be taken first and then moving to this option if needed? Let's start at the other end. Let's go with Jessica this time. Jessica, do you have thoughts about that?
Oh man, I was hoping you'd go the other way this time.
Well, let's go with Sam. He's easy. You know, superintendents, they just always say whatever. Okay.
Throw me a curveball. I don't know. I don't feel super passionately one way or the other. I'm trying to process. If we require all candidates to take the Orella, it costs money to do that. And then if they don't pass, then they have this other option. If we are making it an option, then some people will have to pay money to take the test versus not. And I don't know if I feel passionately one way or the other. So I'm willing to go with whatever the commission decides on this one.
So a definite ambivalent. Okay, that's good. All right. Okay.
That was really helpful, I know.
So, Erica?
Yeah, I mean, the same thing. I agree with Jessica. It's hard to decide whether, but I mean, based on what you and Tony discussed, that if they were to take the Orella and then the sections that they passed, they were able to eliminate that on the holistic and then just focus on the ones that they need to pass in order to receive their license. I mean, I think that kind of condenses the requirements that they need, which would be helpful. But I mean, Jessica factors in the cost, and that you know, raises some concern as well. But I could go either way, both ways.
Okay. And Sam?
Well, recognizing that according to Bruce, I'll just say whatever. Disparaging statements. I actually have a clear position on this. I don't believe that the Orella needs to be required if we're looking at this as one of the 5 options. I can be convinced otherwise, but I think the option in itself demonstrates plenty above and beyond what we would gain additionally from just the Orella.
Okay.
All right. Sam, thanks. Jessica, Erica, thank you. My addition to that is I can see both sides. Like there's 2 edges to this particular weapon. And the one is that this could become, if you go with the test and then backfill with those you did not pass, this could be the option of choice in lots of cases, depending on how well you did on that test. And kind of, anyway, eliminate some of those other options as being viable. But maybe what we can do then, commissioners, is to recommend this for further approval by or recommended for a final vote by the commission, with the caveat that says they can take a look at and discuss whether or not an Orella test is required first before you would follow up with option 5, and let them determine that. I think that would break open the conversation. It may take a little more time, Tony, but
yeah, that'll be okay.
Yeah, I think that would be a bad option to give to the full commission, and then we could work from there. But basically, moving this forward with or without that option for them to determine, so it's in their court at this point.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll draft the resolution. It'll have the both options, and then what we'll do is after the commission would have their discussion, we would it'll be whoever the person who makes the motion would actually say, you know, which the option, you know, what they picked. So
okay,
that can be done.
All right, and Wayne, you wanted to add something?
I just wanted to add some food for thought. I appreciate the fact that you're doing that because it may be the best option is to talk to each individual and kind of get a read on them about, you know, which is the best way for them to go. As a person who is part of the staff, I think it is easier to be able to say, take the Orella first, hope that they pass the Orella, and then you don't have to go through all of this procedure. But there are some people that are even frightened by the idea of taking a test, a time test like an Orella test. And it may be that they have a track record of not doing well in that particular area, and this may be the better way for them to go. So that might be an option too, to leave that to the individual in consultation with them to decide which way to go.
I think it'd be a good conversation for the commission as well to kind of really get them engaged with these options and really take a deeper look at them. So I think so. Okay, Tony, anything else you want to add to that, or commissioners? Okay.
My concern is just comes with time. If you're a strong test taker and you jump in, you take the Orella, you're done, you've moved on to the next process in your certification. Whereas somebody who might struggle in that area, we have these other options, but they're putting in a little bit more work. It's taking them a lot longer to complete. And so we're trying to find equity, but then that can create some disequilibrium I could see on some candidates too. So I like the idea of bringing it to the full commission. I would value their thoughts.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. All right, so our final item, and we have 30 seconds for it, so this will be good. So Wayne, welcome, and we'll talk a little bit more about field audits and the process recommendations. So.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'll try and be as quick as possible to honor your time. I first of all want to thank those who have gone before me. I stand on the shoulders of Mark Robertson of Concordia and Rayette Newman of Eastern Oregon University and Steve Tillery of George Fox University, and then also our own venerable Candace Roback, who were the group members who put together, as an advisory group, put together some thoughts about how we could improve the statute language with regard to field audits. And I think the purpose is to clarify and make it easier to be able to give both EBPs and the staff people who are monitoring this and evaluating this to make it clear what we're expecting and how to satisfy this particular statute. The statute in general is designed to provide verification of candidate recommendations. And you see in front of you the language of the Rule 584-410-100. The handbook also addresses this particular issue on pages 36 and 41 through 43, actually, of the handbook. And in some cases, some of the recommendations come out of the handbook and would bring these statutes in closer, this statute in closer alignment with the handbook, which is one of the things I remember, Bruce, you were talking about just before this meeting. So what I'd like to do is suggest that the staff looked at these this advice from this work group, and we have 5 recommendations that we would like to put forward for the PAC to consider forwarding on to the commission. The first recommendation comes from 3A1, and the recommendation is to revise that rule as follows, and I hate to read this, but I will read it just for the record. The field audit must include 5% or 15 completer records, whichever is greater, from, and then underline the average annual FTE of students for the current state recognition period. And at the discretion of the TSPC, if it is determined additional records are needed, they shall be provided upon request. So the change in language is that which is underlined. Rather than doing the average for the entire 7-year period, which is the way the statute reads now, we feel that it is adequate to take the annual FTE and take a sliver out of 1 year of the recognition period, and then pull those records and monitor those records. Any questions about that recommendation?
Okay.
Okay, that makes sense. The second one is 3B2, and that recommendation is that Teacher Standards Practice Commission will provide a list of candidates to be reviewed on the first full day of the site visit. The field audit's recommended to be at the same time the state reviewers on the site team review the state-specific unit level standards report, but not at the same time as the site visit itself. That is the CAPE site visit. Generally, TSPC staff have conducted the audit, and it generally has been undergone by handing the EPP a sheet with the names, and then they pull those records and give them to the staff member. And then that staff member, while the unit review is going on by the CAPE site visit team, is monitoring and reviewing those records. And the statute language is that the EPP may not know ahead of time whose records are going to be asked for. What this is stating is that on the first full day, it will be given to them, and then they will turn that over on the second day, I think it is, and then we will conduct that audit on the last day, actually after the CAPE site visit. Generally, the last day of the site visit is on Tuesday, and so we would carve out Tuesday afternoon for the audit of the records, and at the same time, the state representatives on the CAPE site visit team would look at the three state standards that we're charged with looking at. Any questions about that?
Bruce, this is Sharon. Is it okay if I ask for clarification?
Sure.
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
So Wayne, if I understand, then you're saying that the EPP would receive the list of names on Sunday because that's the first full day of the joint visit.
That's
and
right.
We would provide access to the records on Monday, and then the audit occurs Tuesday afternoon.
That's right. Yes.
Okay. So, okay.
And that could be either hard copy or that could be electronic.
Okay.
I think part of the purpose of the work group was to accommodate more of the fact that more and more schools are going toward electronic records.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's helpful. I'm building our schedule for December, so just trying to fit that in.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Your dance card may be filled by this time, Sharon.
I'm not seeing where it says the thing about it has to be given on Monday.
Oh, it doesn't.
It doesn't. That's in the handbook, actually. So it's not, that language didn't make it into our recommendation.
Okay, I think the work group's suggestion was to eliminate that. But
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
So
But we didn't pick that up. Yeah, on
okay.
this. Yeah. Okay. The third recommendation is 3C Big B with regard to teacher performance assessments. And the recommendation is that EdTPA EPPs must retain evidence that candidates passed the assessment, such as results, analyzer results, or candidate score reports. Other performance assessments, EPPs must retain evidence of candidate score reports and or rubrics. So we're looking at the EPPs not just to report the scores, but to retain some evidence that indeed those assessments were undertaken by the candidate, and be able to make those available to the person who's doing the audit. Questions? Okay, since I'm out of time, 3C Big C is recommendation number 4. For candidates enrolled in 2 or more endorsement programs, evidence must be provided for each program in accordance with OAR 584-400-140, which is the state approval process for ed prep providers with regard to clinical practices. As revised by the Commission's February 2019 item 5.1, records must include the date of the candidate's first date of placement in student teaching, the final internship or practicum experience, whichever date occurs first. And again, in this particular case, this mirrors exactly the language of the handbook on page 44. So this is an example of where we've tried to harmonize more clearly the statute and the handbook. Any questions about that? Finally, recommendation 5 comes from 3CD5, the content assessments. And this recommendation is an attempt to accommodate the multiple measures piece that we have been putting into place. Recommendation is that evidence of passage of content assessments must include traditional completers, proof of exam completion through results analyzer or score reports. For multiple measures completers for exams where the cut score was met, proof of exam completion through results analyzer or score reports. For exams where candidates meet criteria for multiple measures, transcripts that verify coursework and grades, required clinical assessments, as well as any additional information used to document their qualifications as completers. Completers approved through waivers, proof of exam completion through results analyzer or score reports, and the candidate waiver information. That's basically the 5 recommendations.
Commissioners, any questions or thoughts about that before we ask for the question?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Seems thorough and straightforward. Thanks for the work in putting it together.
Okay. All right. So the question for us, Commissioners, is really, do we support forwarding the agency recommendations that Wayne's just gone through to the full commission to consider for adopting? Let's just go through and do our regular roll call and let Jessica take as much time as she needs. So Sam, we'll start with you.
Yes, I support that.
Okay. Erica?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Jessica?
Yeah, this isn't hard. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. I need, you notice how I always put myself at the end because I need more time. Okay, I would approve it too. So thank you very much, Commissioners. And we would recommend this move forward for consideration for adoption. Okay. All right.
This is Sharon.
Yes, Sharon, go ahead.
Just as this moves forward to for adoption, I just encourage it that the commissioners have in front of them the semi-urgency of final plan being adopted with our site visit at that point then being about a month after the commission acts on this. And I know we can work, if the commission doesn't approve this, we can work with TSPC staff on what will be required for our audit, but the sooner that we can know what's required, the better. Thank you.
The strain in your voice, yeah. Well, maybe we'll just pilot it with you and see how it goes. Okay, thanks, Sharon.
Actually, that's a great idea to have a pilot option.
Yeah, I think
Sharon, most likely I will be the one doing the audit, and I assure you that I will do everything I can to make it as clear as possible and to be as understanding as possible. So.
Oh, thank you. It'll be a pleasure working with you on that.
Okay, Commissioners, there are some information items, and I'll just ask you to take a look at those on the agenda. Do we have any questions, any we'd like to pull for discussion? Because they'll move forward as well at the commission meeting.
None from me. This is Jessica.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Jessica.
None from me, Sam.
All right.
And I'm good too. This is Erica.
Okay, Erica, thank you. I mentioned one thing though, just for the record, I talked to, and so I don't know if Tony's still on or not, but for Wayne.
I am.
Okay, great. The one thing we probably want to clear up, and this could just be the carryover, the overlap in our OERs, but I noticed tangentially, it deals with the NASP application as a specialty accreditor. We have now in our OARs where it says that all specialty accreditors need to be CHIA approved or Department of Education approved, and yet we're looking at AQUEP not having to go through that process before we approve them. I think we need to align that a little bit so we don't look like we're using double standards here. So Tony, that could be done a couple of different ways, but you might want to address that before we get too far down the road. Okay?
Yeah, what we'll probably do is Bruce will do the rulemaking for all those all wrapped up together.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Okay, that's my only thought. Hearing, and I'm not listening very carefully, any other thoughts or points here? We've already gone way beyond our nap time here on TSPC, so we're gonna, I'm gonna suggest that we wrap up, and thank you all for your participation, especially those in the audience and commissioners as well. And Tony, thanks for all the information. Stay warm in Georgia. And with that, I'm gonna say that we are going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Everybody to the Program Approval Committee meeting October 24th, 2019. Chair Bruce Weitzel, we'll do a very quick kind of check. We've done the kind of sound check, but make sure the commissioners are online. You want to identify yourselves, starting with Sam. Are you online?
This is Sam. I am here.
Okay. Jessica?
Hello, I'm here.
Okay, and Erica?
I am here.
Okay, we have a full flight today. That's great. Okay, there are